A jar of brown liquid should not look alive, but this one does. It breathes in silence. Tiny storms rise from the bottom. A skin forms, shivers, disappears. Most people would call it trash water, rot water, something to dump before the smell gets on your hands. And that is the first mistake. Because what if the thing you've been throwing away, the thing dripping from scraps and stems and kitchen remains, is not waste at all? What if it is one of the most violent acts of resurrection your soil will ever witness? Not expensive fertilizer, not some polished bottle with a green label and a lie printed on the front. Just a ferment's dark, sour, restless liquid that costs nothing and yet wakes dead ground like thunder under a grave. So come closer for a moment and leave the bright world of garden center promises behind. Let the noise fall away. Let the labels, the slogans, the expert packaging dissolve. Down here, in the older logic of decomposition, something far more dangerous is waiting. This is Garden Rebellion, where we dig beneath the polished myths and expose the living forces hidden under our feet. Subscribe now and step with me into the dark intelligence of the garden, because tonight we begin with a liquid so simple, so ignored, and so disturbingly powerful that once you see what it does, you may never look at waste the same way again. What makes this liquid so unsettling is not the smell, not the color, not even the fact that it comes from things the modern world has trained you to despise. It is the biology. It is the quiet riot unfolding inside a bucket, a jar, a sealed container where scraps once condemned as useless begin passing through a transformation older than agriculture itself. Fermentation is not decay in the simple, lazy sense people imagine. It is not mere collapse. It is controlled conquest. Armies of microbes move in first, then others follow, each group changing the battlefield, stripping complex matter into smaller and more volatile forms, releasing acids, enzymes, alcohols, esters, amino fragments, mineral ions, and microbial metabolites that the soil can read like a signal fire. When plant scraps, fruit peels, weeds, leaf matter, and soft organic remains are submerged and allowed to ferment, the first invisible workers begin tearing open cell walls that were once rigid as tiny fortresses. Pectin loosens, sugars dissolve, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and trace minerals that had been locked inside tissue begin leaking into the liquid. Nitrogenous compounds break down into forms that microbes can seize and transform. Organic acids accumulate. The liquid becomes both a memory of the plant and a biochemical message. It is no longer simply stuff dissolved in water. It becomes a microbial extract, a dense broth of half-finished life, the kind of substance that does not feed soil merely by adding nutrients, but by provoking activity. And that distinction matters more than most gardeners realize. Sick soil is rarely just hungry. It is often silent. It has structure, but no conversation. Particles sit there like ruins. Water passes through or pools on top. Roots enter and hesitate. Synthetic fertilizers can force a response, yes, but often in the way caffeine can force a tired body to keep moving. The green appears. The growth surges. But the underground society remains thin, brittle, simplified. Fermented liquid behaves differently. In a good system, diluted properly, it enters the soil less like a command and more like an invitation. Bacteria wake. Fungi detect fresh compounds. Protozoa begin grazing. Nematodes move through the moisture film. The rhizosphere, that furious microscopic borderland around roots, starts flashing with exchanges. Think of soil not as dirt, but as a breathing city built in layers. Sand, silt, and clay are the buildings. Organic matter is the infrastructure. But microbes are the citizens, the traders, the smugglers, the surgeons, the undertakers, the engineers. Without them, fertility is a warehouse with locked doors. Fermented liquid helps pick those locks. The acids can help solubilize certain nutrients. The microbial byproducts can stimulate decomposition of old residues. Carbon compounds become quick fuel. Enzymes accelerate disassembly. And when this happens in the presence of roots, something extraordinary occurs. The plant begins negotiating. It leaks exudates, sugars and signals to recruit the exact microbes it needs. The soil is no longer inert medium. It becomes an argument, a treaty, a market of exchanges conducted in darkness. This is why gardeners sometimes report a result that sounds almost mystical. The soil softens, not because magic entered it, but because aggregates begin forming as microbial glues bind particles together. Water starts infiltrating instead of sitting like accusation on the surface. Earthworms return because food webs are returning. The sharp sterility of exhausted ground gives way to a smell richer and deeper. That unmistakable scent of geosmin and humid decomposition. The smell of a forest floor remembering itself. What changed was not merely fertility on paper. What changed was metabolism. There is another reason fermented plant liquid can feel so dramatic. Plants do not need all nutrition in the same form or at the same speed. Industrial feeding often treats them like machines. Input chemical, receive output biomass. But living systems are pulse-driven. They respond to waves, cues, gradients, biological timing. A diluted fermented extract can deliver micronutrients, carbon fragments, and microbial metabolites in a pattern that feels more like weather than force feeding. That matters in stressed soil, especially soil that has been compacted, over-fertilized, stripped of organic matter, or drenched in salts. In such places, a harsh nutrient blast can worsen imbalance. A gentle but biologically active drench can begin rebuilding function instead of merely painting over failure. But there is a shadow side, and it must be spoken plainly. Fermentation is powerful because microbes are powerful. Done carelessly, it can go foul in the wrong direction. Anaerobic dominance can produce compounds that are too harsh, too unstable, or simply unhelpful if the material is rotten beyond usefulness. Applied too strong, the liquid can scorch roots, overwhelm seedlings, or feed the wrong bloom of microbial activity. This is why dilution matters. This is why source material matters. This is why timing matters. The science here is not a fairy tale about dumping sludge on soil and watching miracles happen. It is about harnessing a transitional biological state, catching organic matter in the act of becoming available, without letting it slide fully into toxic collapse. And beneath all of this is the deepest truth. Life restores life through intermediaries. Not instantly, not cleanly, not with the sterile elegance sold in plastic bottles. The fermented liquid works because it carries the signature of transformation itself. A leaf became pulp. Pulp became broth. Broth became signal. Signal entered soil. Soil awakened roots. Roots recruited life. And life, once invited back, began doing what no factory can fully imitate. It began rebuilding the underground engine from within. That is why a $0 liquid can embarrass expensive products. Not because money is evil, because the earth is older than marketing, and biology is still more intelligent than branding. So here is how the ritual begins, and yes, it should feel like a ritual, because the moment you start making this liquid with intention, instead of disgust, your whole relationship with the garden changes. You do not begin with perfection. You begin with what the world overlooks. A bucket, a jar, a lid set loosely, or a fermenting vessel that can breathe without inviting chaos. Then the offerings: fruit peels, vegetable scraps, soft weeds before they seed, old leafy trimmings, spent herbs, outer cabbage leaves, bruised tomatoes, the green tops of carrots, beet stems, wilted lettuce, banana skins, melon rinds cut down small enough to surrender quickly. Not meat, not oil, not anything greasy or salted from the kitchen table of human indulgence. This is for the soil, and the soil recognizes plant memory best when it arrives uncorrupted. Chop everything, smaller than you think. The blade matters because surface area matters. Every cut is an opening in the architecture of the plant, a breach in the wall. As the pile grows, it releases that wet, green scent of rupture, sweet in some places, sharp in others. The smell of sap and bruised chlorophyll. Pack the material into the vessel until it feels dense but not strangled. Some growers add a little molasses or brown sugar to feed the early microbial surge, and this can help stabilize fermentation and pull liquid from the tissues by osmosis. If you use it, Use a light hand. The goal is not to make syrup. The goal is to invite a controlled unraveling. Then add enough non-chlorinated water to cover the mass. If your tap water reeks of disinfectant, let it sit out first. There is something obscene about asking microbes to build a living extract in water designed to suppress life. Place a weight over the plant matter if needed, something clean and inert, just enough to keep the scraps submerged. Exposure to air at the surface is where messy molds and unhelpful spoilage often begin. The submerged world is where the deeper conversion takes hold. Close the container loosely if gas must escape, or use a system meant for fermentation. Then put it somewhere shaded, temperate, and forgotten by the impatient part of your mind. And then you wait, but not passively. You observe. On the second or third day, bubbles may begin to rise like tiny confessions. The liquid clouds. Colors leach out. Green goes to olive, gold to brown, red to rust. The smell changes by stages. At first, it is cut grass and bruised fruit. Then a sourness creeps in. Clean if the process is going well, ugly if it is slipping toward putrefaction. You are not seeking the stench of death. You are seeking the smell of transformation, acidic, earthy, pungent, alive. Depending on temperature and materials, this can take a week, sometimes 2, sometimes longer. Stirring is debated. Some leave it untouched to preserve a stable anaerobic environment. Others stir lightly in the early days. What matters most is consistency, not superstition. Watch the signs, trust the nose, but educate it. When the liquid is darkened and the solids look collapsed, strained of their original pride, pour the contents through cloth or mesh into another container. What drips through is the substance people fear because they do not understand it. It is murky. It is stained with plant ghosts. It can smell fierce. Good. Store it sealed, but not under reckless pressure, and keep it cool if you can. The remaining solids do not go to waste. Fold them into compost, bury them beneath mulch, or return them to the bed as half-digested tribute. Nothing is lost. That is one of the oldest truths in the garden. Now comes the part where amateurs ruin the spell by becoming greedy. You do not pour this liquid straight onto tender roots like vengeance. You dilute it, usually heavily. A common starting range is somewhere around 1 part ferment to 20 parts water. Sometimes weaker for seedlings, sometimes slightly stronger for established plants in battered beds. The exact ratio depends on the material, the intensity of the brew, the condition of the soil, and whether you are drenching ground or feeding compost. The first application should always be humble. Treat the soil as something you are reintroducing to life, not assaulting into productivity. Choose a cool evening or a dim morning. Moist soil is better than bone-dry ground, because biology travels through films of water, and because stressed roots should not meet new intensity and thirst. Pour slowly around the root zone, not onto the leaves unless you know the ferment is clean and mild enough for foliar use. Let the ground drink. You may notice very little at first, and that is where most people fail. They worship immediate spectacle. Real soil restoration often begins invisibly. The first sign may simply be that the next watering soaks in more evenly. Then the crust on the surface begins to soften. Then the smell changes. Then the color deepens under mulch. Then roots stop acting like refugees and start behaving like owners. I think of a woman in Tennessee named Carla Mendez, who had spent 3 seasons fighting a patch of compacted backyard clay behind a rental house. Tomatoes sulked there. Beans emerged and stopped. After a summer of heat, the surface hardened into something that looked fired, almost ceramic. She began making fermented liquid from weed thinnings, cucumber peels, squash skins, and the outer leaves of collards from a neighbor's garden. Every 10 days, she diluted it and drenched the bed under a layer of shredded leaves. In 6 weeks, earthworms began appearing where she had never seen them before. By late season, a soil probe that once hit resistance at 3 inches slipped down past 7. Her autumn kale did not just survive. It thickened into dark, blistered leaves the size of serving platters. She said the ground felt like it had exhaled. That is not scientific language, but sometimes it is more accurate than scientific language. Then there was Marcus Reed, outside Tulsa. dealing with a raised bed that had been overfed on synthetic salts for years by the previous homeowner. The plants came up fast and failed fast. The soil looked rich and acted dead. He stopped chasing growth and started chasing function. He brewed a fermented liquid from sunflower stalk trimmings, beet tops, lettuce waste, and a little molasses. He applied it at weak dilution every week for the first month, then every other week, always onto already damp soil, always beneath mulch. Within 2 months, he reported that water use dropped because infiltration improved and evaporation slowed under the recovering surface structure. His pepper plants developed thicker stems and held blossoms longer during heat spikes. The yield increase mattered, yes, but what shocked him more was the resilience. The bed stopped behaving like a chemically inflated patient and started behaving like a living system. This method also pairs with restraint, and that word is sacred. Do not stack 5 new interventions at once and then credit the loudest one. Keep the bed mulched. Avoid drenching with herbicides, excessive salts, or sterilizing products that would sabotage the microbial pulse you are trying to establish. Give the soil intervals to respond. Fermented liquid is not a one-time miracle. It is a repeated whisper. A pressure applied not through force, but through biological suggestion. Over time, suggestion becomes shift. Shift becomes pattern. Pattern becomes health. And that is when the unsettling part returns. Because once you watch dead-looking soil darken, loosen, and begin carrying that deep woodland smell again, under nothing more glamorous than diluted fermented scraps, it becomes very hard to keep believing the old mythology that life must be purchased in a bottle. You realize you are not feeding plants so much as negotiating with the buried nation beneath them. You are learning to speak in liquids, in residues, in patient, invisible currencies. And the ground, if you have done it well, answers back. The strangest part is that none of this is new. Long before garden aisles glowed with bright labels and laboratory promises, people understood that fertility did not begin in a factory. It began in transformation. Across East Asia, farmers steeped plant residues and organic matter into crude extracts to return dissolved life to exhausted ground. In Korea, traditions that later fed natural farming methods treated fermented plant juices not as eccentric tricks, but as concentrated expressions of seasonal vitality. In older agrarian societies everywhere, there was a brutal intimacy with decomposition. People watched what softened the earth. They noticed what brought vigor back. They paid attention because hunger punished abstraction. Then came the modern enemy, not science itself, but the industrial narrowing of science into saleable certainty. Complexity became inconvenient. Biological subtlety could not be branded as easily as standardized fertilizer salts. A living soil food web is difficult to patent, difficult to simplify, difficult to package into a promise with a barcode. But a bag of nitrogen, a formula, a guaranteed analysis printed in clean numbers that could be sold. So the story changed. Fertility was reduced to chemistry alone. The old knowledge was pushed downward, treated as peasant improvisation, backyard mythology, the habit of people too poor or too unsophisticated to buy the real solution. And that is how suppression usually works. Not always through conspiracy, often through ridicule, through omission, through the smug violence of making living knowledge look primitive beside industrial convenience. The fertilizer age taught generations to see rotting matter as mess, microbial life as background noise, and soil as a passive container waiting for inputs. But beneath that polished lie, the older record remained. In farm journals, in oral tradition, in forgotten practice, in the habits of growers who kept noticing that the earth responded not only to nutrients, but to biologically active returns. So this liquid survived like many dangerous truths survive. Quietly, hand to hand, bucket to bucket, outside the spotlight, waiting for the moment when exhausted soil would force people to remember what the land had known all along.